Captain Jake Morrison stood in the cold metal hallway of Earth's main space station and watched through the thick glass windows as 3 alien ships approached the docking bay. His coffee had gone cold in his hands, but he did not notice because his mind was focused on what these visitors might want from humanity today. The ships were sleek and shiny and moved through space like they owned it, which Jake supposed they did since humans were still the new kids in this galactic neighborhood that seemed to have rules nobody had bothered to explain to Earth yet. The first ship belonged to the Saurians, and it looked like a giant metal snake that could bite a planet in half. Jake had met their kind before, and they reminded him of lizards that had learned to walk upright and wear fancy clothes, but still thought with the cold, calculating minds of predators. The second ship was from the Zephyrians, and it seemed to be made of light itself, floating through space like a ghost made of silver and dreams. The third ship was blocky and practical, and belonged to the Centauri, who built everything like they expected it to last forever and never trusted anything that looked too pretty to be useful. Commander Lisa Hayes walked up beside Jake and handed him a fresh cup of coffee, while she watched the ships dock with mechanical precision that made human pilots look like children learning to ride bicycles. Lisa was the best engineer Earth had ever produced, and if these aliens wanted to talk about building things, then Jake was glad she would be in the room to make sure humanity did not get cheated out of something important. The meeting room was designed to make humans feel small, and Jake suspected that was not an accident because everything the aliens did seemed calculated to remind Earth that they were barely worth noticing in a galaxy full of species that had been traveling between stars when humans were still learning to make fire. The 3 alien representatives entered the room with the kind of confidence that came from knowing you could turn someone's planet into space dust if they annoyed you too much. Vex Sitar was the Saurian delegate, and he moved like a snake, pretending to be a person with scales that caught the light and eyes that never seemed to blink when they looked at you. His voice came through a translator device that made everything he said sound like it was being spoken by a computer that had learned to be condescending. Cathara was the Zephyrian, and she looked like she was made of starlight wrapped in the shape of a person who might blow away if you breathed on her too hard. But Jake knew that was just how they looked, and they could probably kill him with their thoughts if they wanted to. The Centauri representative was named Borak, and he looked exactly like what you would get if you crossed a bear with a rock and taught it to wear a uniform. Vextar spoke first because Saurians always had to be in charge of everything, and his translator made his words sound like he was reading from a script he had used 1,000 times before. He told Jake and Lisa that the Galactic Council had decided to give humanity a chance to prove they belonged in civilized space by contributing 1 warship to the Joint Defense Fleet that protected everyone from pirates and other nasty things that lived in the dark spaces between stars. The catch was that humanity had to build this warship using materials that the 3 species would provide, and they had exactly 6 months to finish the job, or Earth would be marked down as a species that could not be trusted with important responsibilities. Jake listened to this speech and wondered what the real catch was because aliens never gave humans anything without expecting something bigger in return, and 6 months seemed like a very short time to build a warship that would not embarrass Earth in front of the entire galaxy. Cathara waved her hand and a holographic display appeared in the air, showing what looked like the biggest junkyard Jake had ever seen, floating in space near Earth's orbital shipyards. The image showed piles of twisted metal and broken machinery, and components that looked like they had been thrown away by someone who did not want them anymore. She explained in her musical voice that this was the finest technological refuse from their 3 civilizations, and surely human ingenuity could fashion something useful from these generous donations. Lisa's scanner beeped softly as she pointed it at the holographic display, and Jake watched her face carefully because Lisa's expressions were better than any computer at telling him whether something was a good deal or a trap waiting to spring shut on them. Her scanner showed fusion cores that had been marked as unstable by Centauri safety inspectors, and hull plating that Andromedan engineers had rejected as too brittle for their ships and weapon systems that the Zephyrian Empire had thrown away decades ago when they built newer and better ones. Borak's translator made grinding noises like rocks being crushed when he told them that the Council expected results and that failure would prove humanity was not ready for the responsibilities that came with being part of galactic civilization. The three aliens seemed very pleased with themselves, and Jake could tell they expected him to be grateful for this opportunity to prove that humans were barely capable of building something that would not fall apart the first time someone looked at it wrong. After the aliens left, Jake and Lisa stood in the empty meeting room and looked at each other with the kind of understanding that came from working together long enough to read each other's thoughts without needing to speak them out loud. Lisa pulled up detailed scans of the alien junk on her tablet, and her eyes started to light up with the same expression she got when she was looking at a puzzle that everyone else thought was impossible to solve. Jake asked her what she thought about their generous gift, and Lisa's smile was the kind that made smart people nervous because it meant she had just figured out something that nobody else had seen yet. She told him that the aliens had just handed them the most expensive raw materials in the galaxy, and they had no idea what human engineers could do when they stopped thinking about what something was supposed to be and started thinking about what it could become instead. The project began that same day with teams of Earth's best engineers and scientists descending on the alien scrap like treasure hunters who had just found the biggest treasure chest in history, and Lisa stood in the middle of it, all directing people and taking notes and smiling like someone who knew a secret that was going to change everything. 6 weeks had passed since the aliens had dumped their technological garbage at Earth's doorstep, and the orbital shipyard had become something that would have amazed anyone who remembered what it looked like before the project started, where there had once been empty docking bays and quiet workshops. There was now a constant symphony of human activity, with welding torches throwing sparks that danced like tiny stars, and the steady hum of machinery that never seemed to sleep because the work was too important to stop for anything as simple as day and night. Danny Rodriguez was the kind of engineer who looked at broken things and saw possibilities instead of problems, and he had taken the 3 fusion cores that the Centauri had marked as too unstable for safe operation and turned them into something that would have made their original designers question everything they thought they knew about power generation. The cores sat in a specially designed housing that Danny had built using principles he had learned from studying how human hearts worked, because sometimes the best engineering solutions came from copying nature instead of trying to reinvent it from scratch. The triple-core system could produce more energy than any single fusion reactor in the known galaxy, but that was not the impressive part, because raw power was easy if you did not care about efficiency or safety or making sure your ship did not explode the first time you tried to use it. The real breakthrough was in how Danny had connected the cores to each other so they could share the load and compensate for each other's weaknesses while amplifying each other's strengths in ways that created a power system that was actually more stable than any of the individual cores had been when they were working alone. Lieutenant Commander Amy Patterson had always been the kind of person who took things apart to see how they worked and then put them back together in ways that worked better than before, and she was having the time of her life working with weapons systems that 3 different alien civilizations had thrown away as worthless junk. The Zephyrian plasma cannons had been rejected because their targeting systems could not hit anything smaller than a space station. But Amy had stripped out the alien computers and replaced them with human-designed targeting arrays that could track a coin flying through space and hit it dead center from 1,000 miles away. The Saurian missile systems had been discarded because they were too slow to catch modern fighters, but Amy's team had rebuilt the guidance systems and added human-made engines that turned the lumbering projectiles into smart weapons that could change direction faster than the enemy pilots could think, and track targets through dimensional jumps and energy fields that would have confused the original missiles completely. The Centauri energy weapons had been abandoned because they overheated too quickly, but Amy had solved that problem by redesigning the cooling systems using techniques that humans had developed for managing heat in fusion reactors. Chief Petty Officer Rick Thompson was supervising the hull construction, and he was working with materials that had been rejected by alien engineers who clearly did not understand what they were throwing away, because they only looked at what something could not do instead of focusing on what it might be able to do if you approached the problem from a completely different angle. The Centauri hull plating had been marked as defective because it became brittle when exposed to certain energy frequencies. But Rick had discovered that the brittleness only occurred when the metal was used in the configuration that Centauri engineers preferred. When Rick's team treated the alien metal with a modified titanium steel alloy that humans had developed for building structures that needed to survive in hostile environments, the result was armor that looked thin and lightweight, but could absorb energy attacks and redistribute the force across the entire hull structure. in ways that made conventional shield systems look primitive and wasteful. The armor did not just protect the ship from damage but actually used incoming energy to strengthen itself and power secondary systems that could run for hours after the main reactor was shut down. Dr. Ellen Brooks was working on the computer systems, and she had realized early in the project that trying to make 4 different alien artificial intelligence cores work together was like trying to teach 4 people who spoke different languages to sing in harmony. But the challenge was exactly the kind of puzzle that made her most creative. Instead of trying to force the alien systems to work like human computers, Ellen had created a translation layer that allowed each AI core to do what it did best, while sharing information with the other cores in ways that created a hybrid intelligence network. The result was a computer system that could process tactical information faster than any single species design, because it was using 4 different approaches to problem-solving simultaneously, and then combining the results into solutions that none of the individual cores could have reached on their own. The hybrid AI could predict enemy movements by analyzing patterns that human computers would have missed, while also calculating weapon trajectories with Centauri precision and managing power distribution with Saurian efficiency and processing sensor data with Zephyrian sensitivity to energy fields. The ship that was taking shape in the construction bay looked nothing like the standard designs that other galactic civilizations used, because human engineers did not think in terms of boxes and straight lines when they could create curves and angles that served multiple purposes at the same time. The hull flowed like water frozen in motion with surfaces that could deflect sensor beams and redirect energy weapons, while also providing optimal aerodynamics for atmospheric flight and maximum structural strength for deep space combat maneuvers. Commander Lisa Hayes walked through the construction areas every day and watched her team solve problems that should have been impossible with materials that other species had considered worthless, and she felt a pride that came from knowing that humans were proving something important about what intelligent beings could accomplish when they refused to accept limitations as permanent barriers. The workers had started calling their creation the Phoenix because it was something beautiful and deadly, rising from the ashes of what others had thrown away. The ship's weapon systems were hidden beneath hull plates that could open in milliseconds to reveal firepower that would surprise anyone who thought they were facing a vessel built from scrap metal. And the propulsion system was designed to make the ship move in ways that would confuse enemies who expected human vessels to be slow and clumsy compared to alien technology. Every system had been tested and retested and improved until it exceeded the performance of the original components by margins that would have seemed impossible if the test results had not been verified by multiple independent measurement systems. 6 weeks of constant work had transformed a pile of alien garbage into the skeleton of something that might change how the galaxy thought about human capabilities. 3 months after the aliens had delivered their unwanted junk to Earth's doorstep, the first test flights of humanity's creation began under the watchful eyes of Commander Tony Harrison, who had spent more time in experimental spacecraft than any other pilot in Earth's fleet and understood better than anyone else how to push new technology to its limits without crossing the line into stupidity. The ship that emerged from the construction bay looked like nothing anyone had ever seen before, with curves that seemed to flow like liquid metal and surfaces that caught the light in ways that made it difficult to tell exactly where the vessel ended and space began. Tony's first impression when he stepped into the cockpit was that humans had built something that felt alive in ways that normal spacecraft never did, because every control surface responded to his touch like it was anticipating what he wanted to do before he had finished thinking about it. The pilot's chair had been designed using data from the alien ship computer cores, but modified with human understanding of how pilots actually worked, which meant that instead of forcing the human to adapt to alien interface concepts, the ship adapted its responses to match human reflexes and decision-making patterns. The initial test was supposed to be a simple flight around Earth's orbital space to make sure all the systems worked properly. But Tony found himself pushing the ship harder than he had planned, because the vessel responded to his commands with a precision and speed that made him want to see what else it could do. The hybrid drive system that Danny Rodriguez had built from the 3 discarded fusion cores accelerated the ship from rest to maximum velocity in a fraction of the time it took conventional human vessels to reach half that speed, and the inertial dampening system kept Tony from being crushed by forces that would have turned him into paste in any other spacecraft. Admiral Susan Clark watched the test flight from the command center and found herself gripping the arms of her chair as she saw the performance readings that her instruments were showing because the numbers seemed too good to be real, and she kept expecting something to go wrong in the spectacular way that experimental technology usually failed when you tried to do too much too fast. The ship was pulling maneuvers that should have torn it apart, or at least damaged some of the jury-rigged systems that had been cobbled together from alien refuse, but every component was working exactly as the engineers had designed it to work. Lieutenant Carol Wright was monitoring the sensor arrays and watching her displays with the kind of fascination that came from seeing something that should not be possible according to everything she had learned about spacecraft design during her years of training. The ship's stealth capabilities were reading off every chart she had ever seen, because the hybrid hull was not just hiding from sensors, but actively confusing them by scattering scanning beams in directions that made the ship appear to be in multiple places at once, or sometimes not there at all. The modified armor plating that Rick Thompson had created from rejected Centauri materials was interacting with electromagnetic radiation in ways that seemed to violate basic physics until you understood that the metal was not actually breaking any laws of science but using them in combinations that nobody had ever tried before. Energy weapons that should have lit up the ship like a beacon on every sensor array in the solar system were instead being absorbed and redistributed through the hull structure in ways that made the vessel harder to detect the more power you used to try to find it. Gary Mitchell took over piloting duties for the weapons testing phase, and he had the kind of reputation that made other pilots nervous because he could make spacecraft do things that their designers swore were impossible but somehow never managed to break anything important while he was proving the engineers wrong. The rebuilt plasma cannons that Amy Patterson's team had created from Zephyrian discards could punch holes through asteroids with surgical precision, while the modified missile systems delivered their payloads with accuracy that would have impressed marksmen who spent their entire careers learning to hit targets that were not moving through three-dimensional space at relativistic speeds. The combat simulation started with virtual opponents that matched the capabilities of known alien warships. But Gary quickly discovered that fighting fair was not something this ship had been designed to do because every system worked together to create tactical possibilities that existed outside the normal rules of space combat. The vessel could disappear from sensors while firing weapons that appeared to come from empty space, and then reappear behind enemy positions before defensive systems could respond to threats that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Dr. Ellen Brooks monitored the computer systems during the tests and watched her hybrid artificial intelligence network process information and make tactical decisions with a speed and creativity that impressed her, even though she had designed the system herself. The 4 alien AI cores were working together so seamlessly that they had essentially become something new that was greater than the sum of its parts and could anticipate enemy actions by analyzing patterns that single-species computers would never have noticed. Word about Earth's unusual vessel began spreading through the galactic intelligence networks that connected every major civilization because keeping secrets in space was difficult when you had dozens of species all spying on each other and trying to gain advantages over their neighbors and competitors. Most of the reports were dismissed as exaggerated human boasting, because nobody wanted to believe that the newest species in galactic politics had managed to build something impressive from what amounted to 3 civilizations' worth of technological garbage. The Saurian intelligence services filed reports that described impossible performance characteristics and recommended further investigation, while the Zephyrian military analysts wrote summaries that suggested human engineering capabilities had been significantly underestimated by the Galactic Council. The Centauri Defense Ministry produced documents that concluded Earth's warship represented a potential shift in the balance of power that could affect trade relationships and territorial agreements throughout the galaxy. But most alien leaders read these reports and decided that their intelligence services were being fooled by human propaganda, because it was easier to believe that Earth was lying about their capabilities than to accept that they had actually built something revolutionary from materials that 3 advanced civilizations had considered worthless junk. The Galactic Council had demanded a formal demonstration of Earth's contribution to the Joint Defense Fleet because they wanted to see for themselves whether humanity had managed to build something that would not embarrass the entire galaxy when pirates or hostile aliens saw it trying to patrol space lanes that required real warships with actual capabilities. Representative Vextar arrived at Earth's orbital station with a full diplomatic escort of 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyer-class vessels that were supposed to observe the demonstration and provide protection if the human experiment went wrong in dangerous ways. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and felt a satisfaction that came from knowing something important that other people had not figured out yet, while he watched the alien ships position themselves at what they considered a safe distance from what they expected to be a barely functional collection of spare parts, held together with human stubbornness and wishful thinking. His crew moved around him with the quiet confidence that came from months of training on systems that worked better than anything they had ever used before, and Jake could see in their faces that they were looking forward to showing the galaxy what Earth could accomplish when someone made the mistake of underestimating human creativity. Commander Lisa Hayes stood at the engineering station and monitored the ship's systems with the pride of someone who had taken a pile of alien garbage and turned it into something that would change how every species in the galaxy thought about what was possible when you stopped accepting limitations as permanent barriers. Every reading on her displays showed green lights and optimal performance indicators that proved her teams had built something that worked exactly as they had designed it to work, and maybe even a little better than they had dared to hope when the project was just blueprints and theories. The alien representatives came aboard the Defiance for the customary inspection that preceded any formal demonstration, and Vextar moved through the ship's corridors with the kind of condescending interest that he might have shown when visiting a museum exhibit about primitive technology that had been superseded by better designs centuries ago. His scales caught the light from the ship's illumination systems, and his cold reptilian eyes examined every surface and component with the calculating gaze of someone who was looking for evidence that would confirm his existing opinions about human capabilities. Cathara drifted through the ship like a being made of starlight, and whispered observations to her recording devices in the musical language that Zephyrians used when they wanted to be polite, but were not actually impressed by what they were seeing. Her ethereal appearance made her seem fragile, but Jake knew that Zephyrian representatives were chosen for their ability to analyze technology and military capabilities with accuracy that could determine the difference between peace and war when species were deciding whether their neighbors represented threats or opportunities. Borak examined the ship's construction with the methodical thoroughness that Centauri engineers brought to everything they did, and his comments to his aide were translated through his device as observations about adequate workmanship and competent use of available materials, which Jake supposed was high praise coming from a species that built everything, like they expected it to last until the heat death of the universe. The Centauri had a reputation for being impossible to impress because they measured everything against standards of perfection that most other species considered unreachable. Lieutenant Helen Foster at the navigation station exchanged a look with Ensign Paul Baker at weapons control, and both of them had to work hard to keep their expressions neutral because they knew what was coming next, and they were looking forward to seeing how quickly the alien observers would change their attitudes when they realized what they were actually looking at instead of what they had expected to find. The demonstration was supposed to start with standard maneuvers that would show the ship could meet basic galactic requirements for speed and maneuverability, but Jake had other plans. The first part of the demonstration went exactly as the aliens expected, with the Defiance performing competently but unremarkably as it ran through the standard test patterns that every species used to evaluate warship capabilities. The ship accelerated and decelerated within normal parameters and executed turns and combat maneuvers that met galactic fleet standards without exceeding them by margins that would have attracted unwanted attention from observers who were already convinced that humans were barely capable of building functional spacecraft. Vextar nodded approvingly and made comments about adequate performance for a species with limited technological development, while Cathara recorded measurements that showed the human vessel was meeting minimum requirements for inclusion in joint defense operations. Borak's expression suggested that he was satisfied the ship would not be a liability that would endanger other vessels during actual combat operations, and Jake could see that all three alien representatives were preparing to file reports that would confirm their preconceptions about human engineering abilities. Commander Lisa Hayes waited for Jake's signal, and when he gave her the nod that meant it was time to show their guests what the Defiance could really do, she activated the hybrid systems that turned their ship from a competent but unremarkable vessel into something that none of the alien observers had ever seen before. The transformation was not dramatic in any visual sense, but the performance readings that appeared on every monitoring device told a story that made the alien escorts suddenly nervous about their positions relative to what they had thought was a harmless human experiment. The Defiance vanished from every sensor array that was watching the demonstration and reappeared behind the alien observer ships in a maneuver that should have been impossible using any known propulsion technology, while simultaneously demonstrating weapons lock capabilities that showed the human vessel could have destroyed all 5 escort ships before their defensive systems could have responded to what their computers insisted was not actually happening. The ship moved through space like it was dancing to music that only it could hear, while performing tactical maneuvers that existed outside every known framework for space combat. Dr. Kevin Walsh's revolutionary engineering had created a vessel that could function on multiple operational levels by switching between conventional space combat modes and tactics that no other species had ever developed, because they had never thought to combine technologies from different civilizations in ways that created entirely new possibilities for how warships could behave in battle situations. The alien observers stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched their instruments tell them things that their training said were impossible, while Jake Morrison smiled the kind of smile that meant someone had just learned something important about making assumptions. News of the UES Defiance spread through the galaxy faster than most ships could travel, because information about a vessel that could do impossible things was the kind of intelligence that every civilization wanted to verify or dismiss before. Their enemies gained advantages that could shift the balance of power in ways that affected trade routes and territorial boundaries and military planning for the next century. The ship that had been built from 3 species worth of technological refuse had become the subject of urgent communications between governments that suddenly needed to reconsider everything they thought they knew about human capabilities and what that might mean for their own future security. Within days of the demonstration, Captain Jake Morrison began receiving messages from military commanders and government officials representing dozens of different species who wanted to arrange meetings or exchanges or partnerships that would give them access to whatever breakthrough technologies Earth had developed, while everyone else was busy dismissing humanity as a minor power that would never amount to anything important in galactic politics. The same civilizations that had offered their garbage as a generous gift now sent diplomats bearing offers of their finest materials and most advanced components in exchange for human engineering expertise. The first real test of the Defiance came when a pirate fleet that had been terrorizing shipping lanes in the outer rim sectors decided to attack a convoy that was under the protection of the new human warship, because they assumed that one vessel built by the galaxy's newest species would be easy prey for 12 experienced raiders who had been successfully robbing merchant ships for years, without facing serious opposition from any military force. The pirates had grown bold from victories against Saurian patrol ships and Centauri escorts, and they expected the human vessel to either run away or die quickly when faced with overwhelming odds. Captain Morrison and his crew received the distress call from the merchant convoy while they were conducting routine patrol operations near a space station that served as a hub for trade between the inner systems and the frontier colonies, where pirates liked to hunt because law enforcement was spread thin across distances that made rapid response impossible. The convoy consisted of 8 cargo ships carrying supplies and equipment to settlements that depended on regular deliveries to survive, and the merchants had paid for protection that they hoped would actually protect them instead of abandoning them when real danger appeared. The pirate fleet approached the convoy with the confidence of predators who had never encountered prey that could fight back effectively, and their ships moved in formations that were designed to surround and capture merchant vessels while preventing escape to hyperspace jump points that would carry the cargo ships to safety. The 12 raider vessels were fast and well-armed and crewed by beings who had chosen piracy because they enjoyed taking things from people who could not stop them, and they expected the human warship to be just another obstacle that could be removed with sufficient application of firepower. Lieutenant Commander Amy Patterson monitored the weapon systems as the Defiance approached the battle zone, and she felt the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing that her rebuilt alien armaments were about to demonstrate capabilities that would surprise everyone involved in this engagement, including the pirates who thought they understood what they were facing, and the merchant crews who hoped their protectors were competent enough to keep them alive. The modified plasma cannons and missile systems had been tested extensively, but combat against real enemies would prove whether human engineering could deliver results when lives depended on performance. The battle began when the pirate fleet detected the approaching human vessel and decided to eliminate the escort before proceeding with their planned robbery. But their opening attacks revealed immediately that they had made serious errors in judgment about what kind of target they had chosen to engage. The Defiance absorbed the incoming fire without taking meaningful damage, while simultaneously disappearing from pirate sensors and reappearing in positions that allowed devastating counterattacks against enemies who could not track or predict the human ship's movements. Gary Mitchell piloted the Defiance through combat maneuvers that used every advantage the hybrid systems provided, while Amy's weapons found targets with precision that left pirate ships disabled or destroyed before their crews understood what was happening to them. The battle lasted less than 20 minutes and ended with 11 pirate vessels either captured or reduced to debris, while the 12th raider managed to escape to hyperspace after broadcasting warnings about the human warship that other criminal organizations would soon learn to take seriously. Admiral Susan Clark received reports of the engagement and realized that humanity had achieved something more significant than just building an effective warship, because the Defiance had demonstrated that Earth could project military power in ways that would make other species reconsider their assumptions about human limitations and potential threats. The victory against the pirates established Earth's reputation as a force that could defend its interests and honor its commitments, which opened diplomatic opportunities that had not existed when other civilizations saw humanity as weak and dependent on alien protection. Lieutenant Commander Amy Patterson found herself promoted to Chief of Weapons Development and given resources to establish research programs that would apply the lessons learned from the Defiance project to the development of an entire fleet of advanced human warships. The techniques and technologies that had been discovered while rebuilding alien refuse became the foundation for engineering capabilities that transformed Earth from a minor player in galactic politics to a major power that other species had to consider when making decisions about war and peace. Within a year of the demonstration that had shocked the Galactic Council, humanity had risen from barely tolerated newcomers to respected members of the galactic community who were invited to participate in decisions about military strategy and territorial disputes and trade agreements that affected the entire known universe. The species that had given Earth their unwanted junk discovered that humans had a talent for taking discarded materials and forgotten technologies and combining them in ways that created innovations nobody else had imagined. The UES Defiance continued to serve as the flagship of Earth's growing fleet and became a symbol that reminded everyone in the galaxy that the most dangerous mistake any civilization could make was underestimating what humans could accomplish when they decided that limitations were just problems waiting for creative solutions. The ship they had forged from scrap had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapons were built not from the finest materials, but from the determination to succeed against odds that everyone else considered impossible to overcome.